come out onto the plain before dawn and wait. At first, there is nothing to see, just darkness and a faint grey line where the sky meets the land, and the smell of dust and dry grass. Then the light begins. Something impossible starts to appear out of the mist. Shapes, dozens of them. Then hundreds, spires and domes and towers, rising out of the fog in every direction. As far as you can see, brick temples with tapering golden crowns, squat stupas like white bells, great tiered pyramids of red brick standing alone in the fields, stretch to the horizon and beyond it. They stand in clusters and in solitude, among palm trees and tamarind and dry scrub, some of them enormous and famous, some of them small and nameless and slowly returning to the earth. And as the sun comes up over the river, the whole plain turns gold, and the mist rises off it in slow ribbons, and you understand that you are looking at one of the most extraordinary landscapes human beings have ever made. There are more than 2,000 of them still standing here, 2,000 temples in a plain about the size of a small city, most of them built within a single period of 250 years, and that is only what survived. When this place was at its height, the number was many times higher, perhaps 10,000 or more, a density of religious building unmatched anywhere on earth, before or since. To grasp the scale, imagine walking out of your front door and finding 1,000-year-old temple at the end of the street, and another in the next field, and another behind that one, and 40 more beyond it, and hundreds past those in every direction for kilometers. Some of them are so grand, they would be the pride of any nation on earth, drawing crowds and postcards and pilgrimages. Here, they are simply one of 2,000, standing in the scrub with goats grazing at the foot of the walls. Half of them have never been given a name that anyone still remembers. And then, here is the part almost nobody expects. The kingdom that built all of this, the great empire, whose kings and merchants and monks raised these thousands of temples in a frenzy of faith and ambition, collapsed and vanished more than 700 years ago. Its power broke, its capital emptied, its name faded from the maps of the world. The people who paid for these towers, who commissioned the murals inside them, who carried the bricks up the scaffolding in the heat, are gone so completely that most of the world has never even heard of them. But the temples stayed. So here is the ruin of a forgotten empire, a vanished capital, abandoned by history, standing in the dust of central Myanmar. And here, in the same breath, is a place that is not ruined at all, where those same 1,000-year-old temples are still whitewashed and gilded and prayed in every single day, where families still bring flowers and candles to the same shrines their ancestors did, where this is not an archaeological site, but a living, working, sacred landscape. Both of those things are true at the same time. Neither one is an exaggeration. The question this plain asks is a strange and haunting one. What drives a civilization to build on this scale, to pour everything it has, for 2.5 centuries, into raising temple after temple after temple until the plain is full of them? And what does it mean when the empire that built them disappears completely, and the buildings simply carry on without it, still standing, still holy, still burning candles, 700 years after the last king rode away? Says Bagan. Everything here begins, as it so often does, with a river. The Irrawaddy is the great artery of Myanmar, a wide, brown, powerful river that runs almost the whole length of the country, from the Himalayan foothills in the far north down to the delta and the sea. For thousands of years, it has been the highway, the border, the food supply, and the spine of every kingdom that ever rose in this land. Everything moves on the Irrawaddy. Rice, teak, oil, people, armies, monks, gold. To control the middle Irrawaddy is to control the heart of Myanmar, and Bagan sits on its eastern bank, at a bend in the river, in the country's dry central zone. It is worth understanding just how dry. This is not the lush green Southeast Asia of postcards. Central Myanmar has a genuine arid belt, dusty plains of thorny scrub, toddy palms, and hard-baked earth, where the rains are thin and the heat is punishing. But it is fertile, where it is watered, sits at the meeting point of trade routes, coming down from China and up from the south. And above all, it is defensible and central. So, more than 1,000 years ago, a people called the Bamar, moving down from the north, chose this bend in the river and began to build. They called their kingdom Pagan, the name the world still half remembers, and from which we get Bagan today. And from this dusty plain, in the 11th century, it became something enormous. The man who made it happen was a king named Anawrahta, and he is one of the great founding figures of Asian history, even if his name means almost nothing outside this country. Anawrahta came to the throne in 1044, and over the following decades he did what no one had done before. He united the whole of the Irrawaddy Valley and much of what we now call Myanmar under a single crown for the very first time. The kingdom he built, the Pagan Empire, is where the modern nation of Myanmar genuinely begins. Its language, its script, its culture, its national identity, all of it traces back to what was assembled here, on this plain, in these 2 centuries. But Anawrahta did something else, and it is the thing that made this landscape. He converted, completely and fervently, to Theravada Buddhism, the older, stricter school of the faith, and he made it the religion of his entire realm. By tradition, he brought back sacred texts and relics from a conquered kingdom to the south, carried a great procession of white elephants, set about making his capital into the greatest center of Buddhism in the world. And here you have to understand a single religious idea, because without it, none of this plain makes sense. In this form of Buddhism, building a temple, funding a pagoda, endowing a monastery, gilding a spire, is the single greatest act of merit a person can perform. It cleanses bad karma. It improves the next life and the one after. It is the highest and most visible thing a soul can do with wealth. Now imagine that idea taking hold of an entire empire at the peak of its wealth and power. Kings built stupas to outshine their fathers. Queens built temples. Ministers, generals, and rich merchants built temples. Whole villages pooled their money to build small ones. And once a temple was built, it could not be reused for anything else, and it could not be pulled down. It was sacred forever. So they built another, and another. For 250 years, this plain was the busiest building site on Earth, consuming vast quantities of brick and labor and gold in a spiritual arms race that no one wanted to be the first to stop. Hold on to that idea. An entire civilization converting its wealth into permanent sacred stone, because it explains both the wonder of what you see here and, as we will see, quite possibly the empire's collapse. Walk out among them and the sheer variety is astonishing. The temples of Bagan are not all the same. They range from tiny brick shrines, barely taller than a person, to colossal structures the size of cathedrals. There are the great hollow temples, with cool, dim, vaulted corridors, where you walk in from the blinding heat and find enormous serene Buddha statues, standing in the half-dark, their faces catching the light from a single high window. There are solid bell-shaped stupas, gleaming white or gold, built over a relic. There are strange, experimental forms, and there are perfect masterpieces of proportion. Anawrahta Temple, one of the greatest, is a flawless white and gold cross-shaped masterpiece with 4 huge standing Buddhas facing the 4 directions, its gilded spire visible for kilometers. That Bagan rises highest of all, a great tiered white mass towering over the plain. Damayangi, the largest and most massive of them all, is a colossal pyramid of the finest brickwork ever laid in Bagan, bricks fitted so precisely that a pin cannot be pushed between them, and it carries a dark legend. It was built, they say, by a king who had murdered his own father and brother to take the throne, and who ordered the hands of masons cut off if a needle could pass between their bricks. He was assassinated before it was finished, and the great temple has stood, its inner passages mysteriously bricked up, ever since. And inside many of them, on the plaster walls, there are murals, thousands of square meters of them, some nearly 1,000 years old, scenes from the life of the Buddha, celestial beings, patterns and processions and horoscopes, painted in red and black and ochre, still glowing faintly in the darkness of the corridors. They are among the most important collections of medieval painting anywhere in Asia, and most visitors walk past them without ever knowing. This was not a backwater. At its height, Bagan was one of the great cities of the world, and a genuine intellectual capital of Asia, center of Buddhist learning, where monks came from India and Sri Lanka and Cambodia and China to study, where scholarship and law and literature flourished, where the Burmese script and language took the shape they still hold today. For 200 years, this dusty plain on the Irrawaddy was, in every sense that mattered to the Buddhist world, the center of things. And it is worth pausing on how these things were actually made, because the engineering is quietly astonishing. There is almost no good building stone in central Myanmar, so Bagan was built overwhelmingly out of brick, countless millions of them, fired in kilns along the river, carried to the sites, and laid by hand. Many of the bricks are stamped with the marks of the villages that supplied them, so that even now you can read, in a temple wall, which community sent which load 1,000 years ago. The builders used no cement as we know it, binding the bricks with fine mortar, and, in the greatest temples, fitting them so tightly that the joints are almost invisible. They mastered the true arch and the barrel vault. Centuries before those techniques were common in much of the world, which is how they roofed those cool, dim inner corridors in solid brick that has held for a millennium through earthquake after earthquake. And they built for the climate. Step out of the ferocious dry season heat into one of the great hollow temples, and the temperature drops immediately. Thick walls, high vaults, and narrow windows keep the interiors cool and dim, with shafts of light falling exactly where they are meant to fall, on the face of a Buddha in a corridor otherwise the color of shadow. Nothing about that is accidental. These were not just piles of merit. They were sophisticated buildings made by people who understood light, air, weight, and time. And then, in the space of a few decades, it was over. The end of the pagan empire has more than one cause, and historians still argue about the balance between them. But the first problem was the temples themselves. Remember that every temple built was a permanent religious endowment. The land that supported it, and the people who worked that land, were given to the monasteries forever, and were exempt from tax and from military service. 2.5 centuries of relentless merit-making meant that, by the 13th century, an enormous share of the kingdom's best land and manpower had passed permanently out of the king's hands and into the possession of the monasteries. The state had, in the most literal way, given itself away to heaven. Its tax base shrank, its armies thinned, and it could not take any of it back, because to touch it was sacrilege. Into that weakened kingdom, in the late 13th century, came the Mongols. The empire of Kublai Khan, having conquered China, pushed south, demanding tribute. Pagan refused, and by some accounts killed the envoys. War followed, and Mongol armies came down into the Irrawaddy Valley. The details of what happened next are tangled. Later, Burmese chronicles remember a king who fled his capital in terror, earning the bitter nickname, the king who ran away from the Chinese. And modern historians debate how much the Mongols actually destroyed. But the outcome is not in doubt. The pagan empire fractured. Its central authority collapsed. The kingdom broke into competing states, and its capital lost its reason to exist. And Bagan simply emptied. Not in fire and slaughter so much as in slow abandonment. The court moved on. The wealth stopped flowing. The city, the palaces, the markets, the wooden houses of 250,000 people was made of timber and thatch, and timber and thatch do not last in this climate. Within a few centuries, there was nothing left of the living city at all. Nothing, that is, except the temples, because they had been built of brick and stone to last forever, and because they were sacred and no one would touch them, they stood. The empire vanished, the capital vanished, the houses, the palaces, the markets, the people, all vanished, and 2,000 temples were left standing in the fields, in the middle of nowhere, with no city around them at all. That is what you are actually looking at when you stand on that plain at dawn. Not a ruined city. The bones of a vanished civilization's faith, left behind after everything else was taken away. But here is the thing that makes Bagan different from Petra or from any other great abandoned place we have visited. It was never really abandoned, because the people did not leave the region, only the empire did. Villages remained scattered among the temples. Farmers went on ploughing the fields between them, and crucially, the faith never stopped. These were not dead monuments to a forgotten religion. They were, and are, the temples of the same Buddhism that the people around them still practice today. So for 700 years, while the world forgot the empire, local people went on quietly whitewashing the stupas, re-gilding the spires, replacing the little bells on the finials, flaying flowers at the feet of the Buddhas, and lighting candles in the dark corridors. You see it everywhere. A 1,000-year-old temple, dazzling white, with fresh lime wash, a monk's robe drying on a line beside it, villagers walking barefoot across the warm brick at sunset. novice monks in maroon and nuns in soft pink moving between the shrines. Small offerings of flowers and rice at the base of statues carved before the Norman conquest of England. In Europe, we would call this an archaeological zone and put up ropes. Here, it is simply the neighborhood temple, and it happens to be older than almost anything standing in Europe. And around the temples, ordinary life goes on, exactly as it always has. In the villages between the monuments, life still moves at the pace of the sun and the river. Farmers work the dry fields with ox carts, raising slow plumes of dust along the tracks between the pagodas. Women walk to market with baskets balanced on their heads and pale yellow paste, ground from bark, smoothed on their cheeks against the sun, the same cosmetic and sunscreen Burmese women have used for centuries. Men climb the toddy palms to tap the sap that becomes sugar and strong palm wine. And in workshops in the villages, families make lacquerware the way their great-grandparents did. Layer after layer of resin over woven bamboo, dried in underground cellars, polished and engraved by hand, a craft that has been practiced in Bagan since the days of the kings. Full moon days and festival days, the plain fills. Families arrive by the truckload and the cartload in their finest longi, carrying flowers and candles and food, and the great temples become fairgrounds of devotion. Crowded, noisy, joyful, thick, with the smell of incense and fried snacks, children running on the warm brick while their grandparents kneel at the shrines. It is the opposite of a hushed museum. It is a 1,000-year-old building being used exactly as intended by the people it was built for. That is the deepest thing about this place, and it is easy to miss under the sheer visual spectacle. Bagan is not a monument to a dead civilization. It is a monument that outlived its civilization and was quietly adopted by the people who stayed, kept alive by ordinary hands, one bucket of whitewash and one candle at a time, for 7 centuries after the kings who built it had turned to dust. Step away from the temples for a moment, down to the river, because the Irrawaddy has its own story, and it holds one of the most remarkable relationships between people and wild animals anywhere in the world. The river below Bagan is wide, brown, and shallow in the dry season, braided with sandbanks where terns nest and fishermen pull their long wooden boats up onto the beach. And somewhere in these waters, though fewer every year, swims one of the strangest and most endearing creatures in Asia, the Irrawaddy dolphin. It looks almost nothing like the dolphins you are picturing. It is a small, pale grey, snub-nosed animal with no beak at all, and a rounded, bulging forehead, and a mouth that curves in what looks exactly like a permanent, gentle smile. It lives not in the open ocean, but in the murky fresh water of great rivers and coastal lagoons, and there are only a few hundred left in the Irrawaddy itself, critically endangered, slipping away. And here is what these dolphins do, or did, for generations. Along stretches of this river, fishermen and dolphins developed one of the only genuine cooperative hunting partnerships between humans and wild animals ever recorded. The fisherman would tap a rhythm on the side of his wooden boat or call across the water, and the dolphins would come, deliberately, willingly, and drive shoals of fish toward the boat, herding them into the shallows, then signal with a flick of a tail or a roll at the surface at the exact moment for the man to throw his circular net. The fish were caught, The dolphins fed on the ones that scattered and on the confusion in the net's shadow. Both sides ate. Neither was a master, neither was a servant. It was taught by fathers to sons, and it seems by dolphins to their calves, passed down on both sides for generations. Think about what that is. Two entirely different species, sharing a river, who worked out between themselves a system that made life better for both, then kept it going for hundreds of years on nothing but trust and memory. It is the same instinct, in a way, that fills a plain with temples. The sense that you are part of something larger than yourself and that what you do here has to be worth passing on. And it is fading now. The dolphins dying in fishing nets, in polluted water, in a river changed by dredging and electric fishing, with only a handful of the old partner fishermen left. One of the gentlest arrangements our species ever made with a wild animal, quietly ending in the same brown water that carried the bricks to build Bagan. Which brings us to Bagan now, and to a run of blows that would have broken a lesser place. Start with the ground itself. Bagan sits in one of the most seismically active regions in Asia, right beside a great fault that runs down the length of Myanmar. This plain has been shaken again and again through its history. Hundreds of earthquakes have been recorded here in the last century alone. In 1975, a major quake tore through the temples, toppling spires and cracking walls. In 2016, another struck, damaging hundreds more. And then, on the 28th of March 2025, came the worst in generations. A massive earthquake, magnitude 7.7, centered in central Myanmar. It devastated the region, killing thousands of people, flattening whole neighborhoods in the cities, and rippling out across Bagan's ancient skyline once more, cracking temples, bringing down finials and turrets, damaging hundreds of the monuments, and adding thousands of damaged pagodas across the country as a whole. And the restoration itself has been a long and painful argument. After the 1975 earthquake, the military government of the time rebuilt many temples fast and badly, using modern materials and inventing details that had never existed, plastering over the originals and even adding a golf course and a viewing tower to the sacred plain. It was so heavy-handed that for decades the outside world refused to recognize Bagan as a World Heritage Site at all, a wound for a country that knew exactly what it had. Took until 2019, and a serious change in approach, for Bagan finally to be inscribed by UNESCO as one of the great heritage sites of humanity. Barely 6 years later, the earth shook again. The hardest thing bearing down on Bagan today is not the fault line. It is the country's own tragedy. Since the military coup of 2021, Myanmar has been consumed by conflict and crisis, civil war across much of the country, an economy in collapse, millions displaced from their homes, and vast humanitarian need that the 2025 earthquake only deepened. Tourism, which had begun to lift the villages around the temples, has largely evaporated. The balloons that once floated over the plain at dawn rose for the cameras of the world, and much of that world has stopped coming. The guides, drivers, lacquerware makers, and small hotel owners around Bagan have been left with a wonder of the world on their doorstep, and almost no one to show it to. And yet, this next part is true, and it is the reason this film exists. Through the quake and the war and the empty hotels, the plain has not gone quiet. Villagers still walk barefoot across the warm brick. The monks still chant at dawn. The candles are still lit in the corridors, and the flowers still laid at the feet of Buddhas carved 1,000 years ago. Whatever else has failed here, the thing these temples were built to hold has not. So come back out onto the plain at the end of the day and climb somewhere high enough to see it all. The sun is going down behind the Irrawaddy, and the light is turning the whole landscape amber and rose. The temples throw enormous shadows east across the fields. Herds of goats move between them, and the dust of the day hangs golden in the air. A bell rings somewhere, thin and clear. From here, you can see them stretching in every direction to the horizon. 2,000 of them, the survivors of 10,000, standing exactly where they have stood since before most of the world's great cathedrals were dreamed of. None of it is decided. The fault beneath this plain will move again, as it always has. Some of what stands tonight may not be standing in 100 years. The war may end or grind on, and the people of these villages will bear whatever comes. The dolphins in the river may vanish altogether, taking with them one of the last true friendships between our species and a wild one. Nobody knows, but this is what endures, and it is worth carrying with you. An empire poured everything it had into this plain for 250 years. Its gold, its labor, its land, in the end perhaps its own survival, in the belief that building something sacred was the finest thing a human being could do with wealth. The empire is 7 centuries gone. Its kings are names in a chronicle. Its palaces returned to dust so completely that we cannot even find them. And every single morning, the sun comes up over 2,000 temples that its people built, and the mist lifts off the plain, and someone walks out barefoot with flowers in their hands. Take a breath. Stay a while. The sun will rise over the temples tomorrow, whether anyone is standing here to watch it or not. This has been Where on Earth. Thank you for watching, and until the next journey.